Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Today I am going to give a short presentation. Actually short because it's going to make it as interactive as possible. If you have any questions, feel free to fill them at any given point. My name is Moses. I'm local here to Atlanta. I'm here representing Atlanta PHP. Any current members? Yeah, president. Anybody else? Cool. Anyway, and Carl. Yes. So, the conversation today that I want us to have is about concept, a little bit about building applications and how you go about it in another way of going about it, other than picking a framework and saying let's build this. So. This is something that I've been working on for a while, and it's a concept that's not new. I didn't come up with it. It's something that's just from years of doing PHP applications and being a web developer altogether. I like Top Gear. How many of you watch Top Gear? The show. All right, cool. A couple of car fans. So Top Gear is a car show. And apart from the horrible British English jokes and the cool cars, I like it. It's a pretty good show. So they had this thing the other day about the art of building courage. Back in the days before Ford came along and introduced the concept of mass manufacturing of cars, there used to be special shops just to build carriages. So you go out, have enough money, you find somebody to build the axles for you, and then you go to a carriage shop and they'll design it for you. You want your cool leather, cushions and stuff. So once Henry Ford came along, the art of building a carriage was kind of lost because the carriage was built on top of a vehicle along in the factory, along the chain. So, but now that art is coming back, and I think that's where that applies to building applications, is the fact that we all have different types of specialties and we build different things for different purposes, and being able to customize those applications and the way we build it will actually make us build better applications. So, there we go. So, in comes these guys. So, I would recommend you go to microphp.org. It's a site that another friend of mine came up with and decided he's going to put up a manifesto about what it means to be an actual web developer. Number one, and I'll summarize it for you, is to be, I'm a developer. Doesn't care. Don't matter. I'm a web developer. PHP, Joomla, Zend, framework, JavaScript, CSS. I'm a developer. I'm tool agnostic. I build things so that I can be for the web, so I can be a better developer, so I can be able to solve a particular problem. I build for a purpose. So I have a problem. I have somebody comes to me from a client says, I want an application. I want to have members in it, and I want them to be able to click this button and they poke somebody else. That's it. That's what I build for that particular purpose. Well, now that turned out to be Facebook. So I like building simple. So as much as we would like to have a big mammoth application that does everything, I also want to be able to build simple, something that's easily understandable, where the user interface is somebody will come in and I don't have to have a whole big manual to explain how to use this little toolbox at the top. So that is me. That's what I want to be, and I hopefully the rest of you are just like me, and that's what you want. So instead of reinventing the wheel, which everybody says they don't want to do, I want to be able to pimp that wheel to make it work for what I'm actually doing. I want to make it better. It's a wheel, yes. I'm not going to reinvent it, but I'm going to make it better for what I'm doing. So in comes the concept of dependency. And applications these days, including Joomla, have some level of dependency. And the reason I bring this up is because this is how we're going to build our application. We are going to build it with the concept of dependency. Take one thing that's been done, already written, does a really good job. Take something else that's already been written, does another really good job, put them together, and my application has a dependency on those two modules, or packages, or libraries, or however way you want to define them. Alright, so our tool of choice is Composer. How many of you have heard about Composer? How many of you have used Composer? So, funny thing is, I had a conversation yesterday with a gentleman up here, and he hasn't told me he hasn't used Composer Joomla. Right now, did some research, and I found actually you can do extensions for Joomla using Composer, and I thought that was really cool. Now I know I can plug that in into Joomla there. But yes, Composer is a package manager. It is a dependency manager for PHP built in PHP. So that means that I can have my application and specify what kind of dependencies I want, what kind of other applications that do really well, plug them all together and have them work really well together. Then the other application we're going to look at is another one called Pimple. Now, so Composer is a package manager. Pimple is a dependency container. I'll say that again. Composer is a dependency package manager. Pimple is a dependency container. And what that does is that Composer will go collect all the dependencies you want. Pimple will put them together. That is a glue that ties everything together for us to come up with a good application. And just what I just said. So how do we go about this? So the very first thing is introduce you to the tools is how to install Composer. Very simple. We'll not go through the manual, but pretty much if you're working in the terminal, grab the URL from the main Composer page, and that's it. Those are the two lines. The very first one uses Scala, so it goes grabs Composer, installs it on your machine. All I'm doing with the second one is making sure that on terminal, the actual Composer library is available anywhere on your machine. So you can type Composer and the command for Composer, and you instantaneously install it. Alright, so we're going to get started here for a minute. I'm going to take a different approach. Instead of just going through how to do things in Composer, I'm going to take a real-life approach to doing this. I'll go with, we have all been tasked with building the next cool application. So when I did this a couple of days ago, I was learning PHP. So we're going to do a learning PHP application. Since we're Joomla day, it's probably not going to be a Joomla application, but we'll call it bits, because we're building in bits. So just like every good developer does, and when you're going for a minute of time, you go with a piece of paper and you write down all the things you want. The number one condition of building an application is it has to be a really good application. So yes, that one. And then it has members in it. So we want a way of installing, adding members, creating members, deleting members, some form or fashion of managing all members. And since it's also going to be a really cool application, we're going to use Mandrill. Now, I'll explain the reason why I picked that over MySQL or SQL Server. Now, depending on how you do things, there are some tools that you're accustomed to. Most of us, you get Joomla there. You're used to using Joomla to do this. Joomla is just a tool that helps you achieve an objective. Now, there are many other tools out there that may be fashioned better to address that particular objective than you already have. Now, I've been using MongoDB for a while. I am the one coming in development. I think it's fast as a cool factor. So I'm going to use MongoDB. That's the only reason I'm doing it for today. Then our application has to have some maintenance and a newsletter. Since we're locally in Atlanta, we're using Notion. There's no choice about it. And then, what's the next thing? Figure out what are the requirements for our application. We take whatever the client wants, whatever tools we think we can get, and then map them out and make them into actual objectives or functionality. Something that we can give the tech guy and say, hey, this is what we need to do. Number one, you have to figure out routing. Why? Because you have to find a way in which if you point in a URL, it has to do something. Second, you have to figure out storage. We've already decided we're going to do MongoDB, so go look out for something that does really good in storing stuff inside of MongoDB. Number three, authentication. You're doing member stuff, so guess what? Somebody has to sign up. You have to figure out how we're going to authenticate them. What are we going to use? Email versus username. How many, how secure do you want their password to be? Are we collecting their names? Do you want to attach social media authentication to it? So do you want them to log in using Google or Facebook? And then there's a mailing list part. So we've already decided we're using MailChimp, so that is not even a question. And then routing. So there are a couple of good routing applications out there. This is where Carl comes in. He's giving a presentation about Silent support, and it's based off Symfony. Symfony is the large application. Silas is just a small routing piece that's been built independently. I, on the other hand, just like MongoDB, I prefer using Slim. How many of you use Slim? How many about Slim? Yes. Alright, pretty cool. So I'm going to use Slim. It's pretty simple, and we'll go through the code and you can see how this works into it. And all that does is being able to create your routes, being able to create destinations. So we want to go members / ID5. That will do the routing for us. Second, data storage. We're using MongoDB. I picked this library because I wanted to kind of show how you can have a small library that's been built just for that, and another piece that's been pulled out from a larger application. Doctrine is pretty popular. How many have used Doctrine before? Alright. I think there are some pieces of Joom or some places that actually use Doctrine, or there's an extension somewhere. But Doctrine is generally is an ORM. Well, actually, it has an ORM in it. But we're going to use its ODM, and ODM means Object Document Manager. So basically, what we'll just do is, whatever classes we write in PHP, make sure those translate into the actual documents we saw in MongoDB. And then we go to where we start going to the class. So this is a composer JSON. Whenever you're doing something in Composer, the only thing you need to do to declare what you're doing or what you want to get in terms of your dependencies is that. Let's see. So this is what I was looking for. Oh, there you go. So at the very top, it's just a JSON file. You're telling it, this is what I require, and I need Slim because we decided we're using that for router. Now somebody else called Drew M on GitHub decided to write the MailChimp API, and it's pretty good. So I did some search, found out he has the most forks, he has the most stars. It looks pretty decent. That means that a whole lot of people are using it. And that's the MailChimp API. Doctrine have actually put out their own GitHub version, their own version of it on GitHub, so it's there. I'm using Zend Authentication, another example of pulling out a piece from a large framework and using that. And then we're going to use Pimple. So Pimple is also on packages or on Composer. Then we also set a couple of other preferences require that. So this means that every time the application is running, it's dependent on everything that's on the require portion. When we're developing it, these are the libraries we need to do, or these are libraries we need to use. We're using PHP unit for unit testing. How many of you do unit testing in your applications? Yeah. I will confess right now. Every one of my Composer files has PHP unit. The number of tests that I've actually written for my applications is very minimal. It's not a good thing, it's something that's work in process, but it's always a good idea to actually include those in case you have somebody who actually does the writing test for you, and if somebody's going to pick up whatever you're writing and move on there, that is already in the composer file. And then we set a minimum stability. This tells composer that when it goes to pick all these other libraries that are listed, don't bring back any beta versions of those applications. Don't bring back any alpha. Just pull back the only stable versions we have. And then at the bottom, we have something called autoloading. Now, one of the biggest issues with PHP for a very long time, and a couple of guys have been able to address this, was autoloading. Now, how many of you are familiar with PSR? Yeah, awesome. This is good. Then you can help me explain this. So PSR is, including Joomla people, Zend, Symfony, everybody who has outsourced a form of PHP application framework decided we're going to sit down, let's come up with a standard for PHP as a style guide so that whoever does something out there, they can use that framework, pieces of that framework from one application to the other. That's why PSR came out. Now, PSR 0 was the very first standard that came out for autoloading. There's a new one called PSR 4. But what this does here lets my composer know that whatever I'm going to write adheres to that standard and can also be used by somebody else. So this is kind of like gives you a style guide, a way of which to organize your code. Now, after that, what we do, we go into a folder called bits for application and hit composer install. So what do we do from here? Now, this is where we go into the little code sections of how we're going to organize our application. All the code that I'm using today is already in GitHub. If you go to mostfire/bits, you can fork it, start, walk with me the code if you're online right now. You'll be able to see everything that we're doing today. So, with that, let's look at the code. Any questions so far? Anybody? Yes? Alright, cool. Let's see. So we'll start off with the important parts. Let's do that. No. All right. So this is always pretty much the beginning of every PHP application. Start with the index page, and I'll explain what we're doing here in a minute. Very fascinating thing we're doing, because I actually wanted you guys to go to GitHub and be able to pull the code and make it work. I predefined some things. So this is not necessarily part of the concepts of using dependency, but it's so that when you download the code, you can be able to run it yourself. We are working on development, and I have defined my application root. App is a folder where all my non-core code lives. So my views, my routers, my templates, that's where they live. Bin path. This is where I'm going to store. If you saw the composer file before, this is where I'm going to store all the heavy lifting, the core of the actual application, the application that's been pulled in through Composer. And then we have a cache directory, because those are some of the things that we're going to use in our application. From that point on, this line here is what we do with Composer. we specified an outer load. Composer allows us to reference one particular file and have all the pieces that we defined available to us. So the outer load.php, once I pull that into my index.php, I have the Zend, the Doctrine, the Slim, all those applications are available to me at that point. So what do? I go ahead and start defining them. Now, you will see some, I don't know how many of you have written code in PHP 5.4, PHP 5.5? How many? So there's some new syntax with PHP 5.4 where you can do arrays the same way you write arrays in JavaScript. So I'm doing that. There's a lot of namespacing, as you can see here. So since 5.3, namespacing has been available. I'm doing PSR4 type namespacing in some places, but it all works with PSR0. So pretty much here I'm telling my application I'm using Slim views. I have sessions, so I'm going to set session cookies. My application is going to be bits application, and I'll show you where that comes in a minute. And I'll have some authorization and authentication that is allowed in Slim. So remember our requirements required some form of authentication. So I'm going to allow that. And obviously we need to create some way in which our application can view renders the HTML. So that will do it for us. Now, from there, we authenticate our application, call it bits, and we set some configuration, inject those into Slim. And this is where I'll explain a bit about the dependency injection, and then some general configuration options. Now, these are not specific to Slim, but they're good. Like, for example, telling Slim, am I in development? Do I need to see the logs? Other things are like, where is my database connection going to be? And I'll show you that in a minute. So this is our index. Now, I also have a habit of separating my routes and put them in a different file. So I specified a file called init that will run every single time and will define what type of route I'm going to go to. So that's where that is. Now, at that point, let's go to, let's see. And actually, this may not help us. Let's just do that. So let's go to our application. So this is where the core of what we're trying to do lives. We decided we were going to call application bits. This is where Pimple comes in. This is where all the glue of our application is going to be. The very first thing, just like we saw the last file, is we set our namespace, we call it bits, and then all the modules that we brought in using Composer, this is where we define them. We know we're using Pimple. We're going to use Mandrill for our transactional email, and then we'll use Doctrine. And Doctrine has different ways of setting up MongoDB connections, but you need all these three pieces. Now, this looks like a lot of verbiage, and it's a whole lot confusing looking at it from the back there if you've never done it before. But the idea here is, if we're building our application and we're using Doctrine, we are able to correlate Doctrine's documentation and how it does things and pull that into our application. So I've defined how we're going to use Doctrine, which classes we're going to use. I've also defined which classes is then we're going to use, and this is where the magic happens. So we created a class, and we call it application, and we told it to extend Pimple. Now, Pimple, all it does is take different configuration, plug them into one single class as as an array. So all the settings we're going to do here are going to be plugged into the application class as an array. Very first thing we do is create a constructor, and in the constructor I've used a trick called reflection. Now, how many of you have used reflection in PHP before? Okay, cool, awesome. So what this does, it looks at a class and the constructor tells itself, hey, go through every single of the methods that I have defined in this class and just fire them off and just do whatever is in them. So I've told that in my constructor, I've told it, look for any method that starts with the keyword init and just fire it off. And the very first thing we do is pull our configurations. Now, our configurations were set inside a file called development.json. This is particular to our environment. And just like the composer JSON, it's pretty easy to go through. We've set our database information. Wait, let me see. Oh, cool. It's a good thing I took off all my usernames and passwords. But yes, so we have the database settings there, the services you're using, Mandrill, we set up. We have MailChimp, if we use MailChimp. And then the other settings we have below here. What kind of sessions do you want? How long do you want them to last? I just want them for 2 weeks, so that's fine. Keep going, and then that's about it. And then there's something at the bottom here where we said what are our secured URLs that we don't want anybody to go to unless they're authenticated. So pretty much this one init config, all it does is fetches that file and decodes the JSON and sets all the configurations that have been passed through to an array called configs that is assigned to this class. So from get-go, we've already established our configurations are in for every one of our modules we're going to use. Then the second one, you're going to set our database in it. So we'll create something called a document manager because we're using MongoDB. If this is MySQL, this would be table manager. Or however way you want to call it. But this kind of makes sense, and as it goes from a conceptual point, you'll be able to understand what's going on. Now, MongoDB only requires a connection URL in order for you to connect to it. We had already set the configs. So what do? We inject the container that we got from the configurations, and then we set up the host and the port, and after that, everything that Doctrine needs is already assigned, and we have a document manager. So now in our application, we've already set the basis for the document manager, and from now, this point on, we can save a user. So we have that covered. Then the next thing here is we create a postman. A postman is the guy or lady who is going to go send our mail using MailChimp or Mandrill. And the only thing that requires is the API key. So what do? We, again, inject the container and get the configurations for Mandrill, and then we create a new Mandrill object and inject that as an array into our application. So our database is set, our configuration is set, we've already done the postman, and now we do our cache. So we want some level of performance, and we want to be able to cache some things, so we create a cache manager. Same exact thing. We use Zend, plug that in, create a storage factory by telling it, hey, we want this to be in the file system, and we want us to save it inside the sessions section, and this is time to live. That's 2 weeks in, I think that's in milliseconds. So I did the math. And that's it, and we return the cache manager. So anytime we do a cache, that's where our cache is going to live. And then there's something else, a session manager. So user comes, logs in, and then logs out. We want to be able to manage that. Again, same thing happens here. Container, inject that, and then set everything else that Zend requires to set, and return a session manager. Now, as you know, you may not necessarily, when you're doing this, you may not necessarily understand or know everything that Zend requires. But all you need to do is, if you looked at the manual for the session manager, you'll figure out, oh, do I have the configuration for this? Yes. Set it up, and you'll be able to do that. Now, here's the other thing. This is authentication service. How do we create a user, or how do we know whether a user is logged in or not? So we'll create a session authentication service, and we'll tell it where to store that session. Now, because I was not that smart when I was doing this, I decided I'm going to store my session inside the cache. So my sessions are being stored in the file system. You can choose anywhere else you want to store them, but it gives you that option. So at the end of the day, with just this one file, we've already plugged in all the pieces that work pretty well across the board. Zend Session is a really good module that's used across the board to do session management. MongoDB is a good database. We've plugged that in. If we wanted to switch over, so for example, we wanted to use some other extension somewhere else and we want to plug that in, all we need to do is change this, take away, either take that out or change whatever is inside our session manager and have it work with whatever else we're doing. So it makes it kind of a plug and unplug kind of environment, which is what we want. All right, so let's go back here. So we have that. Remember, we have that application now. It's ready to work. So, how do our routes look like? The very first login, or when a user signs up, this is how that works. This is how a slim route looks. And this is where our application comes into play. So, at the very top, we specify what HTTP method this is going to be. So basically this one is just a get, and this one is just, we can display the form. And the fun of doing dependency injection or building things with modules is this. Being able to inject your whole application configuration in a single variable, and the object is available for you to use. So the very first thing we do is check, is the user authenticated through the authentication service? Do they have an identity? Yes. Well, they don't need to sign up anymore. We'll just send them over to the profile because we already know they're signed up. Now, we don't have to run every single connection on every single route because this was already set up in our application. We've already instantiated that. Now, if they are not authenticated, then go ahead and show them the route, and they'll be able to view the form. So what happens after they sign up? And then let's process that form. So, being very good, security-minded, we'll filter the email from the form. And again, as you see, pretty much the same. This time we just post our form to the same route on the sign up. And we know that it's a new one, so we create a new member. Now, this member is the same guy that's here. So, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. So, we've already defined who the member is up at the top. We're creating the new member. We are assigning a new member email, and we are hashing their password as any security-minded person would do. And then with MongoDB, you persist the member and then you flush so that the user is saved in your database. And that's it. So the trick is here, the bits part. Now, let's go to the login one. Let me see, do I have that one? So the login one. So the login one. So this is a route that everybody goes to log in, and that goes through the same thing. If you're logged in, there's no point of doing this. We'll send you to the profile. But if you're not logged in, hey, filter your email, and then obviously send you errors if you're not putting in the right email addresses. But Doctrine does something where they query against the repository. So pretty much they're looking for that particular user inside the member document or member table, however way you want to go about it if you're using MySQL. But this is the adapter. We specified this in bits, and oh, I'm using the wrong method here. But yes, so find out who the repository is, and then this is actually supposed to be there you go. And then find out who the user is. Now, if the user or the result of the authentication is successful, then send them to the profile. If not, send them back to login. So this makes it very simple or very easy to be able to plug things out and plug them in. Any questions so far? Anybody flowing? Got this? All right, cool. All right, now remember. So we decided we're going to use MongoDB for our data storage, and how you create Doctrine MongoDB storage is creating annotations to your document. So you create a class and you just predefine it, and that's it. So the users we're creating when we're querying them against a repository, this is pretty much it. So set up your member ID, tell it what type of value it is, and then create an annotation that tells it it's going to be an actual ID for it to create inside your database. And same thing for name. Now here, name, when you compare this with doing something like MySQL, there's always a one-to-one relationship between the type you're creating and how your data is going to come through. But with this one, you have a choice because MongoDB doesn't have really much a set schema. So what we did is I created a hash, an array for the name. That way, when I save the name, it can be a name, and inside that name, there's an array of first name, and it's going to be John, and second name is going to be Smith. So when I save that particular hash, I don't have to specify how many values I have in there. I can have somebody's name that has a mister in it. I can have somebody who has a middle name. I can have, there are a whole lot of people who have more than 3 aspects to their name, postfix and suffixes. So that is one reason why I prefer to use MongoDB. But yes, so pretty much that's how the class for the member is. And when we go to login, all we do is compare the email and the password against the repository that we created here, that we injected. And if we decided to ever change and switch from MySQL or from MongoDB to SQL, all we need to change is modify wherever in our application, Pimple, that we had set the database storage, and then map this to what's appropriate for MySQL. So this makes it very simple and easy to iterate over. Now, as I said, the code is on GitHub. Feel free to go through it. We can walk and back and forth with the code for anyone who has questions. But so far, are we good? All right. So next is, what do we do after we've done with the code? We ship it. And what does this mean? Is you iterate. You look at what you have. You find out what modules are working. Oh, Doctrine is too complex. Forget about it. Pull it out. Put in something else. There are other ORMs out there. This extension for, MailChimp is good, but it's too expensive. I want to go with Constant Contact, which is actually the other way around. But yes, plug that in, pull that in there. I have a really cool extension that I've been using for social networking. I don't want to be able to store my members anymore. Plug that out from my Pimple and plug in the new one. So you don't have to worry about something changed, we have to restructure the whole application. Your application is pretty much like a house. It's built on loose bricks. I don't know if that's a good example to use, but you can always go in and pull that brick out and put another one in and don't have to worry about the house falling down. Make sense? So that's what building in bits kind of implies. And using dependency injection, you can actually plug as many modules as you want, as little modules as you want, as long as they are able to work together, as long as they have a purpose in what they are actually doing, they will work for you. So, where do I get my packages, you ask? Where do I go find them? How do I know what the best packages are for doing certain methods and certain functions? Packages.org. So, go there, look, it's a keyword search. So, you want database authentication. A whole bunch of them will show up. I want mailing. A whole lot of them will show up. I want to do there's always going to be a module somebody has created for a particular purpose that's available. And if it's not there, guess what? You can write it and add to it. And that way, a whole lot of people will be able to use your application. So there are others out there. There's the frameworks themselves that are pretty good, that have made most of their modules available independently. Zend does it, Symfony does it, Aura, I don't know how many have heard about it. You want to do dates, and I know dates is usually something that is very local. There's a module called Carbon that does dates pretty well. So there's a lot of modules out there that you can use, that you can plug in and plug out. If you're in Joomla, extensions are also available. Yes, question.
Can I imply that the Joomla framework actually has packages up there now?
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. I actually,
Sorry.
yeah, that's fine. That's good. Yeah. So I haven't looked at it, but I do know I went through packages and put in Joomla, and a whole bunch of them showed up. So you can actually use Composer to add extensions and take those out. You can install Joomla using Composer. So that's a method of installation that you can go instead of having to download the Joomla and reinstall it. It's a good way of, a lot of people do this, but I would also not very much recommend it. Deployment as a method of deployment. So instead of having to, the old school of like, yeah, let's have FTP access and upload the files. We're missing 2 files. Okay, gotta go back. Or you uploaded the wrong version, or you uploaded a development version. So you can use Composer to do that. I wouldn't highly recommend it, but I know there are a lot of people who have modified Composer to be able to do that for them. So, yeah, questions? Yes.
For Joomla Day Atlanta 2015, would you be interested in doing maybe a one-day workshop on this?
That could be open.
That's
Yes.
Steve.
Yes. All right, cool. And chat with that guy over there, Chris. He's a Lana PHP organizer, so we'll see what we can come up with. Anybody else with a question? Oh, by the way, whoever asks the best question gets a t-shirt. So that should be some incentive. The only thing I have to do is determine who has the best question. Chris. That is not a very good question. Yes?
I noticed you're using Sublime. You don't use any other kind of integrated IDE or?
Actually, yes. I used to use Zend because I used to do a whole lot of Zend. I used to use Zend IDE, and now that I don't use Zend anymore, Sublime seems to work. I tried Atom the other day. I don't know if you tried Atom, which is a new IDE from GitHub for web stuff. ATOM, yes. I think you need an invite. Now, see me after this. I'll get you an invite. So it's pretty much Sublime on GitHub-ish steroids.
Cool.
Yeah. So another question? Yes.
Was that Clint Eastwood?
Yes.
Was that from the outlaw Jesse Wales?
That was from I forget. But that is a good question.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Somebody else? Anybody else? You've asked all the questions, most of the questions today, so you get a t-shirt. But yeah. But yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Remarks? Good. And yes, my name is Moses. Here's my contacts if you have any more questions. I'm local in Atlanta. I'm a web developer. Pretty much anything out there. GitHub, Twitter, I'm inspired. I do PHP and JavaScript application development. I work with some guys called Epic Labs and 9 Labs. And if you have any questions, feel free to come by, grab a card, and that's it. You'll have a good afternoon.